Mayor Zach Bruin. I'll call the Planning Commission meeting to order. We'll go around the room, around the table to introduce ourselves for the record, and those that are here in the room or watching from home. Fran?
Fran Aaron, Commission Member.
Todd Furphy, City Alderman, Commission Member.
Lee Tall, Commission Member. Joe Terry, Secretary.
Adam Tagan, Community Development Director.
Great, thank you. Item number 1 is approval of the report from the August 14th Planning Commission meeting. Commissioners, what are your wishes regarding that item?
Approved.
Motion to approve by Aaron. Is there a second? Second by Tao. Any discussion, modifications, or corrections to the report? Hearing none, move it to a vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed?
Nay.
We have one in opposition. Motion carried. Item 2, action on Plan 170591, Rouge Companies LLC. This is a conditional use to allow a boarding house within the R3 multifamily residential district. This item was postponed at that 14th meeting. With that, I'll turn it over to Adam, our staff member on this, to give us an update and discussion for that particular item.
At the last meeting, it was tabled to this meeting for some additional time to discuss some items such as parking and just to get some clarification on some other items to allow the commission to further base their decision off of. Before you tonight, I do have 3 items. One is kind of a revised recommended list of conditions. It was my attempt to distill the conversation that occurred last week amongst the commission and try and incorporate those into conditions. The second item is a letter we did receive from Helping Hands Gospel Mission, which was in support of the request. And then the third item is the site plan that was put together by the applicant, showing his intention to basically reconfigure the parking lot to get 9 parking spots in place, redo the entrances, provide fencing along the south and, it would be the west and south boundary lines of the property to enclose the backyard. Those were the 3 items I would update you on. I don't know if you want me to go through the conditions just to clarify any of them or how you would like to proceed. I do have some extra copies of the recommended conditions for anyone who would like one. I don't know if I brought enough, but hopefully there's a fair amount of them.
Commissioners, any questions or any items you want Adam to go into any depth on?
So the parking spot next to the east parking spot, here on the diagram, it looks like it's in line with the driveway apron. Is that code where that could be that close to the road itself?
Well, I will note that this is not to scale by any stretch of the imagination. When we were out there, the distance that is noted on the site plan would basically leave that last parking spot approximately 5 feet from the right-of-way line. And then that area of the property is actually wider, so there would be additional room there to get a vehicle in and out versus closer to the actual building. Then that narrows down to about a 24-foot drive aisle, so it's actually wider down there. We do not have any minimum throat length requirements, which would be that entryway into a parking lot in our current code. So as a result, this layout would technically meet our ordinance.
So how it's wrote up here, or how it's drawn up here, is not really a good reflection of how it's actually laid out.
It's a fairly good one, but it's not to scale, so it may appear to be, spaces may appear closer to drive aisles, that kind of thing.
Well, that's what I'm getting at, as far as coming in from the driveway and then making that turn to the left.
Yeah, basically you would enter, there would be about 5 feet, and then that first spot would be on your left, off of where I think there is a cross section of sidewalk if you have been out there. So it would be basically 5 feet off. That would be where that first parking spot would be located under this proposed plan.
Got a chair up here, and then certainly confuse some of the chairs at the table too if you'd like to sit. Joe?
I do have one question, or I guess a comment on the minimum, on number 3, the minimum of 1 off-street parking garage space be provided for each rental room. I believe that should be excluding the required handicap parking space.
do have that language in the second sentence, but it could be,
Is it in there? Okay.
yeah.
Not inclusive, okay, I got it, thank you.
So the original request was a 10-person boarding house, now we're looking at a condition of 8.
That's the recommended condition.
Recommended condition, thank you.
Yeah, the commission can do with it as it chooses.
Clarify your recommendation, thank you.
Yep.
Commissioners, other discussion, questions, comments, concerns?
Is there any condition or requirement that we can impose that would limit the number of people that would be there and placed there or living in that residence that were under legal restrictions, like parole, or is there anything we can do as a city to put that in this writing, in this condition?
Not that I'm aware of. And and I'm not a lawyer, so I may not be the correct one to answer that, but my understanding is if they legally can rent here for whatever, if there isn't something above and beyond, like if a decision says you have to be living a certain distance from someone or something like that,
Mhm.
that obviously would be a restriction that could be imposed, but my understanding is the city itself could not say that only certain types of individuals could go here unless it was specific to that type of use, for example, a CBRF, where it's dealing with people who have a disability. And then obviously you can restrict it to be only for servicing people with a disability. Because that's a specific type of land use by ordinance. Since it's a boarding house, it would be no different than an apartment building, in the fact that normally the city does not have the right to say who can and cannot live within an apartment building in a multifamily district. But that's my understanding of land use. I'm not an attorney, like I said.
So the only restrictions that qualify to certain individuals would be, say if they were predators or something like that, distance from a school?
Yeah, like I said, if there's a condition of their parole or something like that that has that type of distance requirement, then that obviously legally would be enforced by not necessarily the city, but the law enforcement agency.
There's a chair up here. And I think there was a conversation I had with the folks from Strawberry Lane after our last meeting, and that was very well could be some prohibition for certain individuals being co-located near the facility. And I don't have any further information on that, unfortunately, for our meeting today, but there was a question raised whether or not, I won't label any particular type of person, but if there was any sort of prohibition for living near a facility such as Strawberry Lane. And I'm not sure what Strawberry Lane's designation is, but I just want to share that with the commission. There was some discussion, and unfortunately I didn't get a chance to look into any more on what that prohibition might be. And given this is a land use decision, I don't think it behooves me or incumbent upon us as commissioners to look into that because of the land use question in front of us. But there very well could be some restrictions about proximity to where certain individuals that would qualify to live here may not because of other facilities in the neighborhood, I guess would be a way to say it.
If I'm not mistaken, I believe Strawberry Lane is considered a skilled nursing care facility by the state. I believe it helps license. So yes, if someone came out and they could not be a certain distance from them, then they would be prohibited.
Okay. Then I also got some questions for Shane too. This is won't be staffed, correct?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. But you will have people that come in and clean, or not?
Well, there's common areas and stuff like that, so I mean, there'd be, I have management for my rental business, so this would be, another section of I guess, my rental business. So, I have people that do maintenance, and I have, people on staff and so forth. So if there's, any issues or anything like that, we would, I guess, take care of what we can, so. But nobody's gonna live at the property 24 hours a day or anything of that sort, no.
Okay, but I mean, as far as, again, someone that will occasionally or weekly come in and clean or check or?
Yeah, for an example, I mean, my 8-unit apartment buildings, depending on how big the common areas are, I have a lady that it's either once a week or every other week, that clean common areas, stuff like that. Like this property would have a coin-operated washer and dryer, so I have somebody that goes around to all my apartments that are coin ops, and they clean quarters out, stuff like that. So I mean, there's, you know, there's definitely gonna be traffic through it, you know, through people that work for me, but, I can't say that somebody's gonna be there every day, so.
And the common entrance, is that going to be locked?
I guess I guess I haven't really thought whether that door should be locked or not. I mean, in my apartment buildings, for example, the main entrance into the building, is not locked, and then basically every individual unit would have a locked door, so they can, you know, I guess in a case like this where they're all living, I guess if they're comfortable with leaving the front door open, I guess they could. If there's a lock on the door and they decide to lock it and we put a key on it, it's up to the tenants whether they're gonna lock it or not lock it, I guess, at the end of the night, so.
Well, I guess I'm concerned about, say, someone entering the premises that shouldn't be there, right? And especially if you have a kitchen area or an open bathrooms, I mean, what's to stop homeless or anybody from coming in there? And, I mean, we have occasionally in Rapids where we have businesses, on A Street where, they have multiple units inside the businesses, and some of the businesses close at 5, some of them close at 8, some of them close at 10. So people have been known to go in and just lie down, right? So that's why I'm questioning the security, I guess you'd say.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, you know, again, if I put a lock on the front door, it's up to the tenants to lock it at night. If they decide not to lock the door, I mean, am I gonna be there every night at 10 o'clock to babysit them and say that door has to be locked? No, I mean, I'm not gonna report there every night at 10, but, so just like any of my tenants who rent a duplex, I mean, it's their discretion on whether they keep their windows open at night, whether they lock their front door, whether they keep the garage door open. I mean, that, you know, that kind of falls on the tenant's responsibility of whether they're gonna lock their door or not, really. But I guess in this case, I haven't really, besides doing more or less the security cameras and stuff like that, I haven't really processed whether that door should be a automatic locking door, and I mean, any resident would get the key. I mean, that's something that, you know, I could definitely do.
Well, I think as far as a duplex, you know, what you had mentioned, this is certainly a different animal, right? If you got common areas that would be potentially unlocked.
Well,
Right.
Again, I mean, I have 8-unit apartment buildings with common areas, common laundry rooms, common stairwells of that sort, and the front doors are not locked at night.
Okay.
You know, I have a few of them around town, Port Edwards and stuff, so.
I guess, you know, to play that out a little bit further, I hadn't thought about the access, and, you know, when tenants are occupying a property, they typically have guests, and they have guests at all hours sometimes, and I could see a concern, and I'm trying to drive at a condition here that might ultimately safeguard, or something that the commission could consider as a condition, related to access, and the number of, and I know it's a management concern, so I don't know if there's a legitimate condition around, you know, access to the common areas. You know, what are some of those things that would be appropriate in this situation that would fit the concern? You know, I'm sensitive to having overnight guests, 3 guests or whatever number of the tenants have guests over. You know, we've got the occupants to exceed 8, or the recommendation of the occupancy to not exceed 8. You know, what's considered an occupant? Is that a tenant that's on the lease, or is it in guests? I guess help me understand. Hopefully I'm making my point.
Yeah, the way the condition is intended to be is that's the people who are renting the facility, so no more than 8 people can be living at the facility. I do not have a condition in here that would regulate whether or not they can have guests, and how, quite honestly, from a condition and enforcement standpoint,
Sure.
I don't know how to effectively enforce whether or not someone can have a guest, or if it's only 3 people can have a guest.
But if it's a
don't know.
condition that's contemplated on the lease, then if the lease has prohibitions for guests after certain hours, or access, you know, if there's an automatic locking mechanism, that common areas are locked to you know, if they're not accompanied by a tenant, I guess. I don't know, maybe I'm driving at something that's just
I don't think so.
excessive, but again, this is a land use decision, we're looking at this from if it's an appropriate use of the land and under what conditions to protect health, safety, and welfare.
Right.
And if that's the case, how can we continue to ensure that if in fact this is going to go any further? Joe, you were gonna say?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, you know, it's, the common areas, and correct me if I'm wrong, the common areas aren't, you know, they're common to the tenants, but they're not public areas. It's not like an entry hallway. They're common areas where tenants may be occupying those areas. And given that, I think it is reasonable to expect that the building would be secured and that only tenants would have, you know, that door would be an automatic lock and the tenants would have some type of a key or number pad access. You know, for that type of common use, I mean, to me, that would seem to be normal and a reasonable condition, especially to promote health, safety, and wellness.
Especially since it's common living space versus common like hallway.
Right.
Right, it's cohabitating and, you know, convening in a living room or a kitchen or one of the other rooms that might be available. And I think, you know, we all heard a lot of the concern about safety, right? And we know that I think we can logically state that if we've got fewer people prohibiting access by people that are not living there, it'll go a long way to keeping that place not a nuisance or not becoming a nuisance. But I'm not sure exactly what the applicant would find appropriate or acceptable from that standpoint, but I think in order for me to continue to consider this to move forward, I wanna make sure we've got a nuisance ordinance, we've got some levers, and we've got some tools, but I'm just not fully there yet when it comes to allowing this type of activity in a dense fashion in the neighborhood. I'm not gonna speak for commissioners, but I don't know if you've got any thoughts to that effect, you know, the locking system
No,
at certain hours or.
Yeah, again, I mean, but, you know, if you can't necessarily you can't dictate a tenant, you know, if a tenant wants to have a friend come over at 8 o'clock at night, I mean, it's everybody's right to have a friend come over, or, you know, even in my leases, it's okay for my tenants, if they wanna, if their best buddy's coming back from college or something, they can spend the night for a night or 2 nights. I mean, I have things in my lease that if it's longer than, I believe, a week, then I need to be notified, but, you know, I don't want every tenant of mine calling me if their friend's gonna spend the night
Sure,
once.
sure.
So I think, I mean, there's some, you know, in regards to like locking the doors and stuff like that, you know, that's as simply as, you know, I can put a keypad on again, that tenant, I mean, it might be one of those cycles where the keypad has to be changed every month or every couple of months. Cause again, I don't have control over, if you give my keypad number to a buddy, I mean, you can do what you can, but at the end of the day, it's, you know, it's trying to manage it as best you can, but yet, you know, I can't tell you that person ain't gonna give the keypad number to his best friend who's gonna just show up there and let himself in either, you know, to hang out with them or whatever. So, you know, that would be you know, I mean, even keys for apartments, I mean, I have hundreds of keys and nobody says that those people don't go to Ace Hardware and just get another key made and give it to a buddy, you know, so, you know, but yeah, you know, putting a locking mechanism on the door like a keypad or something, I mean, again, if that's an issue, I mean, I can put something, you know, we can put a locking on every door that when they enter, it automatically locks behind them, and, I mean, that's definitely not something that's, you know, I'm against by any means, so.
So with that, I would suggest that 10th edition, a condition of approval would be the building would be locked to prevent unauthorized access to non-residents.
I would agree. I think that is a reasonable.
I think the only way you're gonna monitor is that have somebody on staff there. If somebody could come in, and he mentioned himself, at 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night, to stay overnight, and they can, I guess they're allowed to. Without somebody on there all the time, I don't know how you'll ever monitor that.
I had a note on supervision, and I've been in some of the group homes that were talked about in town. One in particular, across from probation and parole, next to Wisconsin River Orthopedics, and probably 99% of you didn't know there was a group home or a cohabitating for youth in that facility, and there are, Vicki, how many beds are
Usually
there?
have 10 there.
10 at a given time. That's no small amount of youth that are really going through a tough period in their life, but there is staff there, and it's a licensed facility, and don't get me wrong, it's a very different facility than a boarding house, but I tend to, in my hearing of the comments the last time, I've been trying to figure out from a supervision standpoint, security cameras are one piece of it, but is there a way to accommodate some sort of staffed, I think it's a reasonable condition for us to consider, given the density and the number of people that will be living in this facility, but I'm also not the operator from a business standpoint either, and I don't know what that staffing component, Fran, I don't know if you have additional thoughts of what that might look like, but that's one that concerns me, because and I don't know if it's supervision or if it's just the fact that somebody's there monitoring it a certain number of hours a day. I don't know. Did you have any further
No,
thoughts?
that's, I just don't think it is.
Well,
Can be monitored any other way.
I was gonna say, and certainly, you're a very successful person as far as your rental properties and stuff like that, and a very well thought of landlord and pillar of society. I just, in my mind, I sure would, when I look at 8 people possibly wanting to eat dinner at the same time in one kitchen, to share one oven or one stove or one table, and maybe a couple, maybe they have friends, whatever. I just see so much potential for police intervention. but again, that's of course what we got our nuisance ordinance for. But I sure see a lot of potential problems in that with that type of layout. I really do. But again, it's not.
And I haven't been through the facility to know it firsthand, and I know we saw the site plan I've got in my packet from the layout for the building footprint and things from the last meeting. So I'm trying to assess it from that standpoint too. That I give some confidence to the applicant because of their knowledge of business, and I think you said that, Alderperson Ferky, and it's just a matter of, and maybe if it's got 10 bedrooms, is that it could sleep 10. I don't know if you thought about giving the 9th bedroom to a manager on site to provide free housing, and then
again,
creatively arriving again at addressing some of the health, safety, welfare concerns that residents have, their neighbors, as well as city leaders who are going to have to deal with the situation that becomes a problem.
Yeah, I guess again, like I said at the last meeting, it comes down to business too. It's gotta make sense. If it don't make sense, why do it, But, I guess, also on your note, I've been doing this 10, 11 years. I don't know what my record is with the city with ordinance and stuff. I think overall, I would say I have a pretty good record compared to maybe some of the other landlords in town. So, I do think there is a need for this, and I know Adam was in the building when we were on site here last week, and I think it's compared to the other boarding houses in town where somebody just takes a 5 or a 6 bedroom house and they kind of hodgepodge put it together and try to convert it into something. This type of property is laid out, in my mind, perfectly for individual units, and the way it's designed, it's just laid out well for this type of a use. So, but again, the staffing, at a certain point, what are you paying that person? And, even having somebody go there, if I paid somebody to go there 2 hours a day, what time of day do you want them there? Who's to say 5 people there, nobody just shows up when they're scheduled to be there? There's so many, I don't think really necessarily putting somebody in there is gonna make, I think at the end of the day, you guys put an ordinance, law, or rule into play, and if there's issues, they're gonna be taken care of. Otherwise, you guys know as well as I do, you'll be just sending me fines, and I'm not gonna keep paying fines with people. But you can look at my sheet with the courthouse. We're always taking care of business, whether it's evictions, bad tenants, issue tenants. We stay on top of this stuff. It's not a one-man show in my office, so we pay attention to this stuff. So, I guess that's probably
We
all
also
I can
live
really
here,
say.
and I think there's a big difference in
you
those that are occupants of this community that own rental property, and those that don't live here and own rental properties in the city. No disrespect to those that are good operators, but there's also, as you stated, there's there's a line here. I've seen it. Well, I guess just for commission benefit and those in the room, this recommendation, whether it's approval or for denial, will go on to the city council at its next regularly scheduled meeting, unless something gets scheduled in a special setting to accommodate it. And I don't know, you had some thoughts around when your transaction had to close by or certain
Yeah,
conditions?
so we filed for an extension, they haven't signed it, they were waiting for this meeting to see kind of how this plays out, and then, it sounds like I can get an extension then, so we can wait till, you know, the normal meeting that you guys would have for the final approval stuff, so that shouldn't be a problem.
Commissioners, other questions, comments, concerns?
Again, I'm thinking, what if a fight breaks out during the day, which could happen, somebody bringing booze or drugs or whatever else into that building, nobody there, I mean, he himself is a good landlord, there's no question in anybody's mind on that. I'm just concerned of what happens in this building when there's nobody there to monitor it. That
Sadly, I think there's too many facilities that aren't monitored across town.
Well, I understand that,
To keep
Mayor,
us
but-
up at night.
And
No, I
nothing's
understand what
really
you're saying
happening,
too.
yeah.
I mean, this is asking for much different living arrangements to be combined in a single property. I'm sensitive to that. Bring up a good point. Anybody else? Joe?
So I guess last meeting I discussed what my concerns was really trying to develop that balance between, health and safety in the community and not being, discriminatory towards, to somebody. And, I've received a number of calls from residents in the area and, taken those calls very seriously. I do believe that we have a responsibility to look at this as a land use consideration and condition. And I think these with adding the 10th item, I do think that these conditions, especially considering the new municipal code on chronic nuisance, I think that really sets the stage for local enforcement. If there are problems, the property owner is held responsible financially. So this is a challenging decision, but I do think that this list of conditions helps set the stage to prevent the types of problems that the folks here have been expressing and concerned about.
I would agree with those statements. In particular, the discrimination aspect of it. That we are here for land use and whether something is appropriate land use.
Exactly.
I think that's the toughest balance in the tone to strike, right, is the view that the commission has to look at on this, and ultimately the council will have to have another kick at whatever the commission recommends to them. And I think the one letter of support we did receive was well written, and I think they raise a lot of good points, and everyone is struggling with the not in my backyard, the concern. I mean, it's just a lot of very legitimate concerns everyone has raised. And, I've made a list of all the concerns that I heard, but also that are now reflected in the conditions of approval. And it's hard for me not to be very, very close to supporting a recommendation to approve it, and then ultimately for the council to consider it. And, I think any number of these conditions can be tweaked if in fact we hear that they need to be done. But I think my biggest concern was on the number of people cohabitating in the space, and 10 to 8 doesn't seem like a lot, but I think that's a pretty substantial movement by the applicant as far as I'm concerned.
I do have one more question.
Yes.
With reference to number 7, security cameras, will that be in the common area, the kitchen area, the hallways, or is it just exterior cameras?
No, I can do interior too, and I think I mentioned that with Adam and stuff. you know, at all entrances and exits to the property and so forth, and then, inside the common areas, so.
And I presume there's a recording system, I mean, is there a time, like the time we want that stuff to be recorded for?
I think, Dave Mosier, does all my electrical and that kind of stuff. I know the system that was just put in my new office with all my storage and stuff, I wanna say it keeps on record for like 10 days, it hard drives it, but it's all ran, through the internet, so you can actually pull up your phone and you can check out security cameras and stuff like that. I mean, it's so advanced now to where, I mean, yeah, if there was an issue or something, I mean, you should be able to just pull it up and you can see if there was something happening or whatever, and go from there, so.
I guess another follow-up question, it stems from Lonnie's letter, related to need, and, you know, we all have heard about need, and some of us have seen more need maybe than others, but, have you thought about any partnership directly with Helping Hands and trying to, kind of, I don't wanna say screen, because that gets to this whole filtering of who can and can't live there, but.
So I had a I got her contact through Brian Slinkman at Next Home, cause she had actually contacted Next Home about, you know, trying to actually look for a facility kinda like this, and it was only a 15-minute conversation, and she just kinda brought up the idea of, you know, maybe Helping Hands would lease a couple of the rooms out,
Yeah.
so they would filter their clients through it for a place to stay at night and that kind of thing. So not, you know, so it sounds like more, you know, they may lease a couple of rooms and then they would kinda have their interaction with their clients for whatever they're doing for them.
I just think it achieves kind of a supervision or a management
Yeah.
concern that we haven't been able
Yep.
to solve. That, to me, that's the major outstanding one, is the supervision or kind of oversight, without having to unnecessarily burden the
Yeah.
facility by having a resident manager there.
Yeah, and she actually gave me and I didn't have time to get a hold of this gentleman, but up in Marshfield, there's a place called Mary's Place, and there's a gentleman that his name is I think it's Lonnie Parker. But anyways, he has a facility up there. I believe that has 17 or 19 rooms in it that he leases out. He is there during the day. That's his full-time job. But same thing, he deals with a wide range of people that come in, leases out the rooms, kind of like what I'm doing, but just at a bigger scale. And I know he's been super successful. I didn't have a chance to call him, but I do know that he rents everything out by the week up there. I believe he charges $77 a week, and he kind of deals with the same people and that kind of thing. But it's called Mary's Place, is the facility in Marshfield.
And I'm not saying it has to be a faith-based provider such as what Lonnie represents, or just some sort of mission-driven, mission-based organization that can really help keep the wheels on it and steer it if there's problems. And this is a whole new line of business, right?
Yeah.
You've been forward with us about that, and I appreciate that, but how we can, again, build that in there, maybe we can't, I don't know. It's kind of a late addition maybe to the conversation. Well, commissioners, there hasn't been a motion. Anyone feeling if they have further questions or discussion they'd like to make?
I'll motion approval with the conditions listed here.
A motion for approval with the conditions, with the addition
Of the locked building.
and then I think
The
a
10th edition.
modification to the security cameras in the interiors.
It does read monitor public areas
Okay.
within the structure.
Okay, sorry, you're right.
Exterior
Second
perimeter.
word, interiors. The motion by Burkhardt, is there a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Terry. Move into further discussion. Any further discussion by commissioners? Seeing no further requests to speak, moving to vote. All in favor, signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
No.
No.
Motion failed, 3-3, so, that item has now been disposed of. We'll move on to the next item on our agenda, update and discussion on the zoning rewrite project with Civitech. If you'd like to leave, this is a good opportunity, unless you wanna sit for a very riveting part of the discussion. on zoning, which is an important thing. We just sat here talking about all that. Thank you all for coming. Because it was a negative motion, we reported to council as a negative motion, however,
It goes forward.
Yeah, we should.
Folks, hey folks, if you can maybe just grab the folks out there, I just for everybody, point of order, definitely want to get you on the sign-in list, but the reason why I wanted to grab you all is because this is a recommendation to council. This will get reported at the next council meeting, which will be the third Tuesday in September. So certainly if you want to watch the process from this point forward, you can do so. That meeting's in City Hall, the conference room here, sorry, the council chambers here or on public access.
Usually the 19th.
The 19th of September, thank you. So if you want to relay that message to the folks out there. Thank you all.
Yep, have a good day. Everybody signed in? Yes, yep. Shane?
I was gonna
One
ask
need
you
an
that.
extra.
No,
How did I know?
especially when I didn't even know my office. Well, I did earlier today.
You don't have to sign it.
I showed up here yesterday.
I just read on the very bottom.
I sent me a text. What's going on at the meeting?
Hi, Tim.
Hello.
I need to email you the information. Why can't
I can
It's
move,
still
I
take
can
5
move wherever
days
you
to
want.
get your own
That's fine.
home.
I was wondering if.
I got it yesterday.
Oh, well. It went on Friday,
So.
Tim, good afternoon.
Hello,
Welcome.
I'm sure you exceeded the building or the room capacity for the last meeting.
We had just enough chairs. I kept watching and waiting for someone else to come in and
They
need to
just
grab
kept
some
on
more
walking out
chairs. So thanks for not taking someone else's seat. All right.
The media's gonna stay for zoning ordinance. Must be slow news people.
I'll be here anyways until.
But that's right, there's finance tonight too.
Is that sign-in list?
That's right here.
You got it? Okay.
How you want that condition.
I have it typed in here, so.
Did we approve the 14th? Did we skip that? Did we do that today?
Oh, you,
Oh, it was before?
Yeah, it was
yeah, I
right
had
Okay.
just gotten started when you were
Okay.
walking in. Yeah, we had quorum,
With
so.
4-1.
Ready?
By all means, yeah.
Okay,
Sorry,
okay.
I wasn't gonna give you the cue
I'm
there.
gonna start with the.
Sure, we could put this up on the video screen if you want, or we could just go through the paper, whichever way you wanna do it. I'm gonna go through my paper copy anyway, so.
If we've got paper copies, you can direct us there.
Yep, everyone should have it.
We'll do it that way.
Okay. So I'm just gonna, quickly, go through the highlights of this. So I'm gonna start on page 3, going past the title pages.
Page 3.
The 8th Street corridor is.
8th Street.
Yep, the 8th Street.
Page 3 and 8th Street,
Yep, so it looks like existing conditions.
yep, okay.
And it really talks about the fact that this is a very common aesthetic and functional commercial/retail corridor. Easy to park, delivery truck, direct access to the buildings, things like that. Locally and nationally, many of these tired corridors are being retrofitted to better represent the unique character of the community and retail attributes that include enhanced site landscaping, signage, stormwater management strategies. So revitalizing this corridor is an economic development strategy that will benefit both Wisconsin Rapids and business owners. That's basically the conclusion of this study, is if this is something that you want to take on, we certainly think that that would be a strategy for Wisconsin Rapids, for improvement in Wisconsin Rapids. Some of the things that happen, moving on to page 4, the corridor includes numerous adjacent parking lots that are not connected, which can be really frustrating for the retail users. Many curb cuts are required just for this lack of connection, leads to a high percentage of hard surfaces, and a lot of safety conflicts for pedestrians and bicyclists. The large paved areas and limited landscaping dominate the aesthetic, and many parking lots are underutilized. If you look at the aerial photos, and even if you just drive out there, there are so many spaces that are just empty, almost constant. The median that's there helps to divide the traffic. Obviously, the Wisconsin DOT has reconstructed this corridor, but it's not really large enough for significant landscaping, and it doesn't give pedestrians and bicyclists enough of a break as they're trying to get across. So there could be some other strategies that would help using the existing design, because that's obviously just fairly recent and going to last it quite a while. Moving down, large driveway openings and parking areas along the street right away. No continuous edge treatment of landscaping or fencing to separate pedestrians from parking. Something that's an issue everywhere, cars overhanging the sidewalk. So that's an issue not only for the pedestrians, but it's also an issue for snow removal and all kinds of different things when the cars hang over there. So those are all very obvious things that you all knew were happening out there. I think another thing on the next page, page 5, about halfway down, there's a lot of different heights of signage. The one thing I noticed today, the signage isn't as tall as maybe more of a highway corridor, but it's tall enough that it's really focused on the cars. And looking at your ordinance, you've done a pretty good job of bringing that down lately. So it's really improved over the last 5 years, but it could use even some additional improvement. So at the bottom of page 5, it starts to talk about parking areas could be linked together to reduce the number of curb cuts, allow for more contiguous landscaping. One of the things that happens if the landscaping is just spotty, it doesn't have enough effect. It needs to be combined. And it also gets to be a nuisance for the people doing the snow plowing and the lawn mowing and things like that. They gotta go to this little spot and go to that little spot, and it just seems like a real nuisance, where if you can combine it a little bit, it helps with the stormwater, it helps with the visual effect, and it helps make it a little bit easier to maintain in the long run. Some real successes out there. I mean, if you go out there, you guys know the ones that look good, the Culvers and the CVS Pharmacy and the Walgreens, and some of those are really nice, and even those could use a few more trees. That little bit of scale helps a ton. Many properties have no barrier between the parking lot and the sidewalk, so the cars hang over. Crosswalks are not evident to the drivers. It's really hard for the drivers to see the crosswalk. So different strategies that could maybe make those a little bit more. So some bottom of page 7, retrofit examples: landscaping, lighting, fencing, narrowing the amount of paving are common strategies to retrofit old commercial districts into safer, more attractive streets. So the complete streets concept, if you're aware of that, you can Google that and kind of get an idea of what that means. Shoreline Washington spent more than 10 years converting their street into the image below, and I think the point with that is this has got to be something that you're patient with. It's going to take some time, and all of these different communities that are talked about used a number of different strategies. They used the incentive programs, they used education programs, and they used ordinances. And you almost got to have all three in combination. You can't do one without the other. The ordinance gives you an opportunity to tell the business owners, well, you're going to have to do it eventually anyway, or at least a part of it. The incentive program gives you the political will to have the ordinance. If you're incenting business owners, it's a lot easier to get that ordinance passed. And then the education program, which in my personal opinion is the most important. If you just go to the Chamber of Commerce and have some training sessions, and the landowners start to see the benefits that you're looking for by doing it themselves, that's the most effective. If they buy in themselves, that's the most effective way to get it done. So those are the things that these communities used long term to try to change things in those corridors. Also, and you can see the picture of Walgreens up there, those businesses that have invested in it, they can be your examples when you're doing the education programs. They can talk to the other owners about why they do it that way and why it's important for their business to show up like that. Glendale, Wisconsin is a close one. That's over on page 8. They pursued a multi-year project of adding landscaping, paving details, replacing large pylon signs with ground signs to change the character of Port Washington Road. So those capital improvement investments, that's also like a fourth step, is you're investing as a community in things out there that helps the business owners to understand the public's also investing in it. So some examples in the pictures, bottom of page 9 talks about how to do crosswalks a little bit better. You can see that island on the bottom of page 9 in there. That just gives the speed of getting across the crosswalk as a pedestrian, the ability to take a break in the middle, to get those cars to pass, to have the patience for it to be safe. So it just reduces the amount of traffic that they have to cross. It also effectively does a little bit of traffic calming, so the cars aren't going above the speed limit. The cars feel a little bit more constrained, so they're going a little bit lower speed limit. It makes the entire retail corridor work better if the cars aren't speeding. So you feel a little more comfortable getting off the road into one of those retail spaces. It seems to be a pretty easy sell to the business owners that traffic calming will help their business to be more effective. And if you can reduce the speed, then you don't need the big tall signs. You can bring those signs down to a scale. It just overall, long term, seems to have become a better result for everybody, kind of a win-win. When you start to reduce those speeds and you start to get that traffic to understand it's a commercial corridor, you get them off and into those businesses more safely. If you're a driver and you have a negative experience getting into one of those parking lots or getting out of one of those parking lots, you're not going to go back to that store. So that's what we've seen in our studies. On the next page, well, and under crosswalk, it talks about some different things. I think it's the traffic calming that's the most effective, but also reducing the amount of time to cross and then making it more visible. So that's what the illuminated signs, the flashing red, things like that make it more visible for pedestrian crosswalks.
You've got a nice example of that. I think folks will probably recognize it from Culver's, that was a safety improvement. But I haven't heard anything from the crossing guard in that area, but when you drive it, the motorists seem to monitor it. I don't know if it's the combination of the lighting and, as you're proposing here or suggesting here. So I think it's a good example, though, in our own community that we have one that's functioning.
Especially at night too, when, you can see those LED lights for half a mile, when somebody presses the button.
Even the simple one on Grand Truman, that really helps out a lot.
Yeah, by IGA, yeah.
Then on the next page, it goes back to that Port Washington Road in Glendale. They've reduced the number of curb cuts. So the access to the businesses is actually better. They don't need to dodge in and out off of South 8th, if you will, or in this case, Port Washington Road, because they've combined those parking lots together. So there's flow between. They can borrow each other's parking spaces when there's need for overflow. Typically, businesses operate at different times. So parking need is a little bit higher maybe at this time on this business. The next door business, the parking need is a little bit higher on a different time. So if they're connected, it's also easier for the consumer, because then they can find their way out onto South 8th a different way than just having to go through the curb cut, which is sometimes a little bit of a gun situation.
Well, and then there's also the access, and we're going to jump in the gun here, but just, the ones that always stick out to me are the Higher Grounds Cafe Sleep In, right? That is the worst, I think, on 8th Street, if you were to drive and survey them all, and how that all got allowed in the city at one point in time. But I think the point is well made, that the number of curb cuts and safety, as well as the appetite for users or patrons of some of these businesses, really the dynamic would improve if in fact there was some intentionality around curb cuts. I think 8th Street was constructed in 70 something, early 70s. So
8th Street?
yeah, and just in terms of the era of, and then methodology around curb cut and all the other things you've been talking about. A very different time than it is today.
I was gonna ask, you know, when you talk about limiting the number of curb cuts and having common parking or common access to different parking spots, parking areas, for different businesses. Now, is there speed bumps or something like that, so you don't got people racing through one parking lot to get to another?
You can do a lot of different things. Speed bumps are definitely one. Another would be so that it's not a straight shot.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you might have to go past a parking island or something, so you've got to kind of maneuver. So there's traffic calming, if you will, inside of that too, that needs to be done in the design, rather than just creating a straight shot, like you say, that they could try to keep up with the traffic out on 8.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's a good point. It's certainly something that the business owners are going to need to be aware of.
And you're not trying to create a frontage road situation where, you know, people are driving on the same road.
And I don't think it would make sense for it to be parking lots connected from one block to the next block all the way. But if you connect from the middle this way and from the middle that way, you know, then you've got 3 or 4 or 5 businesses that are connected that can get out onto this block, and the other going the other way. So it's like you say, it's not a frontage road, but it's more of a connection.
But you can see in larger areas like the mall and stuff like that, where, you know, where people get into the parking lot and they're just balls to the walls, you know, right?
Point A to point B. Well, and I think the other benefit that A Street has, and maybe benefit or not a benefit in some ways, is the 7th Street and 9th Street, right? In some sections there are frontage almost off the back that kind of enable, you know, if you were to reduce curb cuts, you still have ample, generally, access off the rear. Not that that's always desired, but it's safer.
It kind of
Well, and I think you see, in those situations, I think you see people using those a lot. I know I do.
Yeah.
And I see a lot of other people, just because, you know, if you're not making a right turn on the way out, you're not getting out, so.
Yep, very true.
Is this proposal something that the city takes care of or does themselves, or the people that do?
Yeah, we can talk about that. I think the proposal really looks at 3 different things. So the incentives would mean the city helps to pay or finance the private business doing it. Education, which the city helps to educate, but the private owner does it themselves. All of the investment, everything. So educate, incentive, and then the third would be an ordinance where the city would require the private owner to do it. So and then the fourth would be capital improvements on the public right-of-way stuff. So where the city's investing actual money would be in the incentive programs and in the capital improvements. But on the business side of things, the education and the ordinance would require them to do it.
The reason I ask is because this is a beautiful beautification thing, and I like the idea. But, you know, before you get to A Street on East Grand Avenue, from Lincoln Street to A Street, we've got I mean, it's terrible along there. First of all, you got the old pizza place, which don't look bad yet, because there's nobody in it. But then you got the old Shank gas station thing there. Beyond that, next block, you got the old car wash. Across the street from that, there's that little narrow building there that I know one area has never had a tenant for several years now, and probably can't, because there's parking is only in the back. There is no place in the front that you can park there. So I'm concerned really about that area, even right now, more than A Street, because, well, I like it, don't get me wrong, I think it's beautiful. And we've done a great job of beautifying this city, really have, we've done some great things. But if we're gonna put money towards something, I wonder if we couldn't do something to get rid of some of that, or help get rid of some of that stuff that's
Some
out
of the
there.
blight. So is it, what corridor, so I understand you're speaking, you said?
East Grand Avenue.
Oh, East Grand.
From Lincoln to 8th.
Yeah, Lincoln to, oh yeah.
So they down almost.
Right, yeah. Well, the good news is 2019, that entire corridor is being reconstructed. And so I think we've been having some internal discussions about the private properties there,
Yeah.
and saying, there will be some curb cut reductions in some areas.
some
There
access
will, yeah, some access changes, as well as parking and the narrowing of, right, I mean, there's
Yeah,
through travel lanes in
right,
there.
2 travel lanes instead of, in most cases, 3.
Yeah.
And that allows for larger boulevards, it allows for on-street bicycle accommodations. And it really is gonna give it a much nicer feel. We'll be able to include more landscaping.
Well, that's
It's
fine,
really
I'm
gonna
glad
be
it's
pretty-
being considered,
Yeah.
really do it.
Yeah, but you
That really
pointed
is
spot on, and that's, I think, the last leg of the stool when you talk about capital improvements, that if we're
Right.
gonna rebuild it, let's do it right.
Yeah,
We're not gonna ever
absolutely.
rebuild 8th Street in this current form with the suicide lane, whatever you wanna call it, in the middle, right? So I think the good news is you're.
And the next question I have is, can you force these people that have businesses there to do these things?
Through ordinance, right? And that's sort
I
of
mean,
Well,
you create an ordinance, an ex post facto, so to speak?
Well, what'll happen is when they wanna redo their parking lot or.
When they come in for a
make
permit of some
change,
kind.
Yeah, I see.
Then they have to
If you come in
apply.
for the permit, there was one that we missed, a big opportunity across from CVS that never, you know, at least in our lifetimes, won't get done again, right? And unfortunately.
Well, what's sad about, that situation is they knew ahead of time.
Right.
It was well discussed.
But you're right, I think there's a trigger in here that I
Yes.
think we're all, that kind of our work forward here is to create that trigger.
So that's really the next page on page 12. Well, just hitting real lightly on page 11, other things that can help, the scale of the lighting. If the scale of the lighting is designed for 45 miles an hour, it's gonna be tall, and it's gonna continue to make, you know, people feel like driving 45. You know what I mean? If you design it for that. So if you can bring that scale down a little bit on the lighting, maybe even some banners, things like that, you really give it that pedestrian scale, and you improve the aesthetic and the feel of the corridor. So those are things that can be done in the public rights of way that help. Those are investments that can be made by the public. So then, on the next page, it talks about parking lot landscaping. There really should be some landscaping between the sidewalk and the parking lot. That's a key to break that and make the pedestrians feel safer. But then inside the parking lots, you can use it for stormwater management. It's certainly a character of Wisconsin Rapids for water quality. There's definitely that conservation ethic here in town, and so having the stormwater management in landscape islands in the parking lot helps a lot. Helps to reduce that kind of the heat sink of having a huge area of parking all combined in one. But the key again is not to put little chunks of it, but to get it together. Landscaping should be clustered together rather than scattered. Clustered areas of plants and green space will have a more significant visual impact, be easier to maintain, and will have a better chance of survival in Wisconsin's winter climate. That's always something that you gotta think about when you're doing these ordinances and things like that. There's somebody that plows that lot, and a lot of times they make a lot of decisions. The person that's plowing the lot makes decisions, so you gotta kinda think about that when you're drafting ordinances and things, is not to make that person too upset. If you can make that plowing decent and not too awful, although plowing snow is kind of an awful job as it is, but that combining it together helps, because then they don't have to dance around a bunch of little things. Pedestrian walkways can be even combined into these long planting strips, bioswales, small rock strips. Those are all things that can help with the. So the next paragraph is phasing, focusing on public infrastructure improvements and developing an implementation plan and schedule for private property owners. A redevelopment plan should detail the inclusion of landscaping, reduction of curb cuts, adding median and crosswalk enhancements, improved pedestrian connections, and look at individual properties to understand unique issues related to the proposed changes. And you talked about the sleep in, and so that's kind of some of those unique situations that you gotta look at too, besides an overall plan. All these strategies combined, or just a couple of ideas, will have a significant impact and add to the value of the 8th Street corridor. So that's really the study in a nutshell. I went through it pretty quick, but it seemed like you guys got it, understood it real well.
Succinct, it was very, very well.
She did a nice job with it.
And the intent was not to obviously, go into a lot of detail, just kind of hit the high issues so that you can kind of carry on the conversation. you know, at the plan commission level, with public works, with, you know, property owners and developers and so on and so forth. And, you know, as you're doing that, then you're kind of building the basis for taking more detailed steps and more programs and spending, you know, money out of the budget for something like this. And, you know, if you were to hazard a guess, you know, in terms of landscaping, I mean, how much of the 8th Street corridor do you think, just within the right-of-way, is landscaped? I mean, what percent?
0.
Yeah.
Oh wait, no, the one crossing
There's
we
one
have
crossing.
about.
There is one crossing and it
Less
looks
than
very
one.
nice,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And if you were to simply say, okay, we're gonna spend X dollars and we're gonna change that number from 1% to 5% over the next 5 years. And then after that, we're gonna add another 5%. So incrementally, you're adding things and that, you know, creates more support for what you're doing because people can see it. It's not something that you're gonna do overnight, but obviously working with the DOT is gonna be important.
Yeah. And I think the incremental effect that we've got a lot of obsolescence on buildings and vacancies in
Right.
buildings. So if uses change, the trigger then for the ordinance to be met, so you get a landscaping plan that looks like CVS or one of the others that have been mentioned, or the next. I think that's the thing to me that's exciting. The rebuild of 8th Street, if we can see it in my tenure, my lifetime, would be a good thing, but you know, it's gonna be far off. So I mean, that's a really long term, but I think your point is well made.
The other thing to mention is, while we were out in the hallway, we're sitting there watching that video of the new pool. What do those architects do in those videos to really make that screen pop? They add a tree.
Landscape, add trees, yeah.
Add a tree. I mean, it's graduation at the high school where my kids go in La Crosse. There was one tree. And you'd come out of graduation and everybody would be waiting to get their picture taken under that one, you know. It doesn't take many trees to really change things. So, you know, even a little bit of investment in, you know, maybe getting a contract with a landscaping firm to, maybe the Chamber of Commerce does that, you know, or some sort of a education program. And those little things like that can really make a big difference.
Yeah.
And if you look at the corridor again, you know, from the curb to the sidewalk, most of those areas are paved, asphalt, they're gravel, they're weeds. You know, they should be putting that in green. Shouldn't allow them to do that. I mean, it's you know.
It'd make a big difference if
It-
just that.
it'd be
that-
huge.
It is challenging though,
Yeah.
where you have a 3-foot boulevard, number one, for grass to grow without irrigation. Number two, for it to be grass for more than a year. If you're lucky, it'll be weeds. I mean, that is a real challenge in a downtown neighborhood.
You're right.
Yep.
Especially with the salt from the trucks.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. There's one photo here, not to drag this out anymore, but there's one photo that, here's another one. It had a very narrow street terrace.
Page 4 in the middle.
Page 9, page 9. The middle photo right there.
Mhm. I've seen it, yeah.
You know, I mean, obviously you've got to pick the right kind of trees. But you know, that street terrace there's, you know, 3 feet wide maybe. So it can be done. It just takes effort on the part of people, you know,
It
the
needs
property
some
owner,
plan, yeah.
in terms of maintenance, and you know, maybe there ought to be some kind of recognition program for businesses with, you know, superior landscaping.
I think a lot of times you're finding where there's median landscaping, where the entire median was landscaped, within a few years, you'll see on that same photograph, if you look at the median here, there's a buffer between the curb and the plantings, because the temperature of the concrete results in soil temperatures that can't sustain growth. And so you'll get a buffer of wood chips or something like that, helps cool those soils, and then the rest of your median looks really, really nice.
And your comment about irrigation is important. Don't forget about irrigation. I mean, if you're gonna require things, Irrigation and maintenance are both expensive, they cost money, but if you're gonna invest in it up front, you want it to last long term. And so that's gotta be part of the education program, it's gotta be part of the investment of, you know, it's,
Right.
it's just necessary in some situations, so don't lose sight of some of those details.
Okay?
Very good.
In
Okay.
that same photo, though, you look at the outside lane there, you actually got, plants that encroach right into the curb, right? I mean, with A Street South with semis and stuff running on that, or even the trees, you gotta have a pretty narrow tree there if we got a semi running next to the
Yep.
curb.
Yep,
so.
you bet.
A lot of details, but I think Charlie pointed out that people respond to the physical surroundings,
Mhm, right.
right? In terms of asphalt, if they see lots of asphalt, that's a trigger. That means I can go fast. If you put in greens, landscaping, if you put in, banners, if you put in, other kinds of things, that's a clue that says, oh, I'm gonna slow down, and people respond to that. So,
Our downtown Main Street group in La Crosse invited Craig Culver to come and speak. And you go to that, and he talked about the flowers that, and you don't even think about it typically, but all of a sudden you're thinking back here, oh yeah, every Culver's I've been to is beautiful,
Right.
gorgeous. They spend a ton of time and money on that, and that's the reason DMI had him come and talk, was so the other business owners could listen to his philosophy about that physical character of the space. So those are ways that your education program can improve, is you get them listening to not consultants or not zoning administrators, you get them listening to Craig Culver's and CVS Pharmacy, and you get them listening to other business owners whose philosophy it is to go to that investment level. That's where the education programs become effective.
okay, onward.
Sure.
Let's talk about adult uses. Just real quickly. So as part of or in your packet, there's a cover memo, and then there's some court cases here. Don't want to spend a lot of time on this. Basically, what you have in your current zoning code are regulations relating to adult uses, and we're carrying those forward into the new code. And what we want to do is make sure that the foundation that we're establishing is sound if in fact they're ever challenged. And there was a case where a community had all these regulations, all very good regulations, but they didn't lay the foundation by referring back to the negative secondary effects of what they're trying to address. And that's the only thing that you can kind of regulate. Okay, so in order to lay that foundation again, we're asking you just to browse some of these court cases. Obviously, you don't want to, or you don't have to read them, in detail, but just kind of look at those where they talk about the secondary negative effects. Okay, so that way, when you're making your recommendation, there's this, a basis for your recommendation in terms of we're recommending these regulations for adult uses because of these secondary negative effects. Okay, and we're going to be asking the Common Council when it comes their time to have the same kind of reading, so that here again, when they vote on it, they have that foundation for why we're doing what we're doing. Okay, any comments, questions? If not, onward.
So you just kind of look at your purpose statement in your zoning code, why you're writing a zoning code, and then these negative secondary effects, how they are not consistent with the zoning code. You want the zoning code for, safe, sanitary, whatever you have in the purpose statement, and these secondary effects, they are in opposition to that. And that's why you use these negative secondary effects to help regulate these. And certainly you're required to provide space for these uses somewhere. But the location in general has to be very specifically regulated so that they don't have an effect on that purpose statement in your zoning ordinance.
Okay.
And our attorney is very evident in this draft.
Okay, if you'd open up your binder to tab 4. This is not in the new packet, so this is something that we had looked at last time, and I just want to touch base. Tab 4, page 4-9. We added a new section called site visits. And last time, we just kind of went through this real quick, saying that this is new. And I just want to touch base to make sure that, you know, what we have here makes sense. Again, a site visit is when Plan Commission in mass, Board of Appeals in mass goes to a property to view it. So
tonight would have been an example where we could have gone out to the boarding house so that the commission can see the neighborhood, could walk through the building, get a better sense of the layout, that kind of thing, so that you have that hands-on experience, so.
And what we do here is kind of lay out, you know, the procedure, I guess, so it's not forgotten. When you do a site visit with Plan Commission, Board of Appeals, whoever, that is a public meeting. And the difficulty is, you know, everybody hearing what's being said. And nobody's really taking notes and minutes and so on and so forth. So the site visit is simply to go and look and come back and talk about it. So, okay?
Okay.
In your pack,
The real world issue with that is typically the applicant is gonna wanna talk to you on site. And if it's a controversial issue, the people that came into this room tonight are gonna wanna talk to you on site. And you can't do it. You really gotta bring that stuff back to a meeting. So you go to the site, you view it, come back to the meeting, then you answer your questions of stuff that's fresh in your head about the site visit. It's that public access to your conversations that's very important. So if you're whispering amongst yourselves during a meeting, that's a bad thing because the public doesn't have access to that knowledge. So it's really important that from a public open meetings law, that's followed. It just protects you as a plan commission to make sure that your decisions are done according to state statute.
okay? Article 14, wellhead protection. This is a brand new part of the code, at least as far as this draft goes. You do have these very similar kind of standards. Again, we're talking about public wellheads, and obviously the issue is certain land uses, if they're allowed in the base zoning district, like gas stations, should they be located within those wellhead areas. So these are the standards, again, carried over from your current code, kind of reformatted a little bit differently, but the standards are the same.
I did notice just a couple things I had questions on.
Okay.
This particular one in the 1114 02 purpose.
Mhm.
I read more like it was talking about shorelands and shoreline vegetation and things versus wells. So I didn't know if that was just something that got carried over from a different section incorrectly. It just didn't seem to specifically address wellheads or well protection.
Yep, okay.
Yeah, and so kind of one makes sense, and then it talks about spawning grounds and setbacks from waterways.
Yeah.
So I don't know.
Okay.
There, and then
Good catch.
on page 14-2, and you've got the table on permitted land use activity. I'm guessing that Bayfield, I didn't know if Bayfield County is just kind of the go-to in Wisconsin, or if that should be Wood County, because I honestly don't know. But I'm guessing you would want to reference Wood County Land and Conservation
Yes.
Department. There.
Sorry about that.
No, that's okay. I do it all the time. An RFP that said call the city of Marshfield and then my number, so it's happened.
Okay.
And then 2 down from that, when you're talking about single family, I guess this makes sense if you were gonna be doing residential on large lots on sewer treatment, but there's no reference to single family on city sewer and water. So is that saying that we wouldn't allow single family on city services? And is, I guess I was a little taken aback I guess I was surprised we wouldn't allow single family on city water and sewer within a wellhead protection area. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And I guess I would, if that's also probably a discussion for the commission on what uses you wanna allow and not allow as far as residential within a wellhead protection area.
So that's on at least one, right? A single one.
Yeah, I don't
We've got the
think,
340, I think most of the water and lights down in the south
Oh, I guess
east
that's
corner
the
are
property.
technically in the city.
That's what I was thinking about as far as city jurisdiction, but
Yeah.
the properties, I guess we own the properties technically too, out in wellhead protection out in Grand
Right.
Rapids.
But the wellhead protection ordinance only applies to land within the city.
Yeah. But I think some of those are in the city.
They are, right?
Yeah.
That's-
Some are, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
And the key in this one, I don't think is the single-family dwelling, I think it's the private on-site sewage system. So we could maybe even take that first portion of that out,
Right.
so that you're not talking about single-family as a land use, you're talking about the sewage
Private
system.
onsite sewage, right,
Right.
because that's the concern, it's not
Right.
the.
Yeah. We'll look at it.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that, cause I can see that being an issue, cause I know there's been even just very high level discussions at the city of, do we wanna ever try and develop the properties that the wells are on? If we're looking at a city subdivision or something like that, so I wanna make sure we don't hamstring ourselves
Okay.
on that.
And that, like 4 down from there talks about sanitary sewer mains.
Mm-hmm.
So if you are developing it as residential, then, you know, this gives you the idea of where those need to be designed
Right.
to be set back. So I don't think it's the land use specifically, I think it's the environmental concerns of the
Yeah,
sewer
definitely.
mains.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
And then probably, you know, for those wells that are kind of out on islands, so to speak, of the town,
Yeah.
you gotta be talking to the town about them perhaps adopting, you know, similar ordinances for land uses around your,
Right.
That's a good idea.
so, okay. Anything else?
No, that's, just wanted to clarify those couple items.
Okay. So on the zoning map, we'll have a line showing those wellhead protection areas. These are the regulations, okay? The next one is the Downtown Design Overlay District, Article 15. So, as part of the overall zoning code, there is a section talking about architectural standards, okay? But given the nature of the downtown, it's very unique in terms of the buildings right next to each other and so on and so forth. And they're always up to the front, they're up closer to the sidewalk, so therefore, there's gonna be a district, again, shown on the zoning map, showing where the downtown design overlay district is located. And in drafting this, you know, we're always trying to figure out, you know, what level of regulation is appropriate. And because you're basically starting from nothing, this is kind of the bare minimum in terms of the things that you might wanna be looking at. You could always, you know, beef this up, you could ask us to beef it up if you don't think it's, you know, strong enough, or if it doesn't, you know, talk about all the issues, but this is probably a good starting point, I'm thinking, in terms of kind of moving the bar just a little bit higher.
In general, where are we talking about this map, that, what areas of downtown are we, I can try and visualize, or is that what we're determining?
It's
Well,
not been
that-
drawn yet.
Yeah, that would be.
But,
part
so
of-
what are we thinking of, you know, streets that would be,
I guess in my mind, somewhat following kind of what the waterfront plan does, so on the east, it would start kind of at the point of where the library is, Lincoln and
Okay.
East Grand, kind of on there. It would follow Jackson down towards the courthouse, kind of as a northern boundary, over to the river. On the south, you would probably take in the south side of East Grand, but not really, it doesn't really extend far beyond there. And then on the west side, at least, again, this is just my thoughts, but it would be Jackson Street kind of as that northern boundary all the way over to the expressway. And then it, I guess kind of one of the big question areas is whether or not you throw them all into this area, or if you basically just kind of run along the mall and then get
look, I think we've, you know, in many of those areas, it's been determined that that's where the decorative street lighting is. You can kind of see where that decorative street lighting ends. You know, when the engineers for the city are working on those projects, those are the type of boundaries that they're looking at for, well, where do we place these assets? And so they're, you know, that's kind of the boundary we're looking at, so.
And it also follows what our Connect communities, that's kind of our downtown group is slowly being built around, and we have a map of that if I can provide that to the Plan Commission, just maybe as a starting point. So I would kind of that would basically follow the area I described briefly. But
And this would be then things that of aesthetic value that need to be reviewed for changes if there's something there. I mean, what about tearing a building down? Would that need to be reviewed then?
I believe the way this is phrased is yes, building removal would be reviewed
Right.
as a major work item. Unless I'm,
Okay.
but it's not a historic preservation ordinance.
It's
and
not historic preservation.
Not saying that you can't remove a building.
No, I'm just
that you-
Good point of clarification in terms of the spectrum of which we can allow or disallow certain things in one area.
So, under section 05, on the bottom of the first page, there are obviously certain things that can be done within the downtown design overlay district that can be done without any kind of permit or approval, okay? Obviously, if they're replacing materials with very similar materials, cleaning for finishing, tuck pointing, those kinds of things, those are just permitted. Okay, when you're changing the actual physical character, adding on to something, then it needs to go to the Plan Commission. Okay? And we're not talking about paint colors, we're not talking about color schemes, that's something that is important, but we didn't go to that extent. So at the top of the next page, page 2, that's where we get into, buildings and any kind of alteration to the site. Parking, things of that nature have to be reviewed for that purpose. Okay? So we talk about building setbacks, and then we talk about building design. And under building design, there are 8 things, that can be, talked about. And, we've got, 1 or 2 sentences for each one. I mean, we could have a page or, multi, layered sections on each one of these. But here again, it's, kind of figuring out where that appropriate, bar is. And again, this is kind of the starting point, I guess.
Yeah, if you as a Plan Commission, obviously you have experience in the downtown with some of the applications that have come before you. If there's something here that you're like, there's just not enough here, we need more there, that's what we need to know, is what you want more information on, what you want more regulation on. We're recommending this as a very starting point, a very base level. So, that's where your expertise really comes into play.
I guess, is there any interest on the commission on seeing like the community's regulations that are pushing the bar farther? Obviously there are probably communities you think of that have a downtown area that is what you want to see Rapids in a perfect world be, and a lot of those are gonna have those more robust downtown regulations that are gonna get into that. Maybe it would be helpful to be able to kind of compare them. This is 3 pages. I'm sure some of those are probably 20 to 30 pages at least on
Right.
just downtown. Another alternative would be a design book. Was the note I had in here. That basically it's a graphic representation of what this is. So it gives them, whether it's a downtown business owner, they have the ability to kind of flip through and get a sense of what these regulations are saying they can or cannot do. So I have also seen that.
is there any value in having, because I mean, people change over, you know, in the commissions and stuff like that, to have it tied back to a comprehensive, whatever is the latest adopted plan, comprehensive plan for that area, so that there is a cohesive vision, and it's not, one, group, and we've all been in this one for quite a while now, but, so that there is continuity for this long-term thing, that there's an adopted, and if that changes, if they choose to change the adopted plan, it's still everybody working towards a common plan, and it's not individual entities saying, no, this is what I'm gonna do in the downtown, and so that it is a comprehensive goal and vision.
I guess, Joe?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Essentially to have the zoning language strong enough to set some general parameters, but reference the planning document, and that's where really, that vision of what the downtown should be, would be in the plan rather than the zoning code.
Yeah, and that can be whatever is the most up-to-date and adopted vision.
Right.
But I'm just thinking it gives a direction and a guiding light towards what it is, as opposed to, nope, this is the new great thing that we're doing, and we're gonna tear down all the buildings and put in parks.
Sure.
And but if that's not the vision of what's best for the community and agreed upon, then so I think to have something for us, from different commission members, if you one's gone, and you're still on a continual plan towards one unified downtown look.
I guess, I try to, I don't know if it was an earlier section or discussion, but I was thinking this whole question about property rights, right? And the ownership of property, and what does that allow them or not allow them to do with their property, I think it's not something I'm well versed in, but I agree. I think, something that would reference somewhat of a community or adopted vision. At one point in the city's history, that plan wouldn't be revised, or there wouldn't be exceptions, or, something to it, but I do think that having some sort of guide that's incorporated as part of this, I think from a starting point, it's a great starting point in reading it. It's like, okay, if we don't obviously have anything like this of the sort today, and if we did, we would be looking at similar pictures to probably what's up on the wall there in terms of look and makeup of our downtown, recognizing that times have changed though too. So I guess with that said, I would support having something further in here that adds a little bit more meat to it. I mean, it doesn't hold us hostage, it doesn't create a major unnecessary burden there, but I think that would be a welcome addition. So I don't know if that's enough direction for you folks.
Yep.
In that regard.
Yeah, just something that forces us to, one, think about what we want first, and then hold us to that plan, as opposed to whatever the feeling is of the day.
I do like, the question around the demolition of buildings, right? I know that's been a topic of sensitivity here over the decades, and it probably has been in other communities as well. I'm not sure exactly where I would fall on that end of the spectrum, but I think it's worth considering or contemplating it here in some form, that there should be some, I don't know, I guess I defer to more of the experts on that.
But the city does have historic preservation ordinance? No.
We have a chapter reserved for it,
Oh, okay.
but
Okay.
there's not a historic preservation commission or anything
Okay.
of that level.
I see.
Which I think is why we're kind of broaching some of this discussion in this room around.
Yeah, there's not a
somebody
track
who-
history in this community of having that perspective or that
Okay.
regulation.
Okay. So this was the first, presentation. We'll come back. And probably at that time, we'll also have the zoning map a little bit further along, and we can actually show the where the proposed area is, if that makes sense. And then we'll also pull out the comp plan, as part of the land use update. I kind of flipped through, and I don't recall the specific paragraph or section talking about the downtown. So that vision might have to be something that's kind of, drafted.
Right.
Developed.
Well, like I said, the one I reference is always the downtown waterfront plan, which is probably the closest thing that we would have to that. And that was adopted in 2009.
7,
Right. So
I get
So
confused. 7, 12.
somewhere in there. Before our current comp plan, I know that, but.
Oh, the comp plan was 9, yes.
Yeah. So somewhere in that time.
Okay.
That is something I can get you to just skim over.
Okay, the last thing I wanted to touch base on real quickly was article, what is temporary labeled numbered 55 for fencing.
Where's that fit in our book?
Well, that's why it's 55.
Wherever you want.
Put it at the end.
Somewhere after 54.
Yeah.
Okay, there you go. Thank you.
The reason why
Good
this
idea.
ended up as an article all by itself is because, obviously the city spent a fair amount of time drafting the fence code, the fence regulations. And it just didn't fit neatly as a land use category, so that's why we called it out as a separate article. So what we see here is all of the development standards relating to fences. And then as part of your current code, you have a whole section talking about permitting and procedures and who does what, who's responsible for what. And that's gonna be located elsewhere. Okay. So, this is pretty much, again, I don't wanna say verbatim, but basically all the content is drawn into the new chapter. There was a discrepancy, and it's I'm not sure which is right, but on the second page, down towards the bottom, there's a whole section talking about corner lots.
It should be 6 feet.
Should be 6, okay.
Okay. Marked up in my current code.
Okay. So, here again, I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on this unless there's questions.
I do have a question on the prohibitions. Certainly the razor wire. I wonder though if electric would have a similar use as the chicken wire, except when used for gardening type purposes, and as long as it's maybe a certain distance from the property line. For deer management, sometimes a very low electric fence works very well, and I know some people use that. I'm not sure what the commission feels, or if there's any other recommendations if it's used for that type of purpose.
So if you look on page 55-4, 1155-12, fences permitted without a permit, we do allow in parent 3 agricultural farm fences limited to agriculturally zoned or used districts. Maybe the electrical would be allowed in the rural residential district? Is that what you're kind of getting at?
Well, I was getting more at we have problems with deer in gardens, and some people.
It's not the agricultural district.
No, just in a residential garden, middle of town. And I've seen where some people will erect a chicken type fence. You can see it from quite a distance. I've also seen though where, and after talking with some people that have them, I guess it maybe makes a little sense, where an electric fence on a post that's about 12 inches off the ground, and a deer gets slightly tangled in it and just doesn't come back. And so they're very effective. They're not an eyesore, but clearly one has to ask if it's appropriate use in a residential area. And I think maybe with some consideration of setback from the property line, so that you don't, accidentally cause issues with, with a neighbor or whatever. And maybe not. Maybe it's just not a direction that we want to even talk about.
Well, in the permitted one, we could alter something around the garden fencing or the underground electrical fences. you know, maybe it's 1 foot
Sure.
down, so you could have an electric fence, or a garden fence that is the past, I don't know.
Sure.
I see your point on it.
I think what you're talking about is using it as a deterrence to, for a garden, not where
Not as
this is
agricultural
like,
to contain
like a
livestock.
property line,
Right.
boundary kind
Right,
of thing.
right.
Good point. Yeah, I think if there's inclusion in that, I never even gave it consideration. I suspect they exist in parts of town, but I think if there's any consideration in that permit area, would perhaps be appropriate.
Or the determination is just garden fencing, and that's
Yeah.
considered garden fencing.
Right.
Yeah.
Speaking from personal experience, I have somewhat of a larger property, and occasionally I'll come home and I'll have 14 deer in my yard eating my trees. So I was looking for a silencer, but I haven't found one yet. But, you know,
I'll take the
Rolled up magazine?
yeah, but, you know, and I do have some of the wildlife management, deer hunters come during the fall, and they just can't, you know, take care of all the problems that I have. So I certainly would be willing to listen to any type
You
of
understand
barrier
the issue.
that might certainly assist my property, and I'm sure there's others that lose a lot of trees and shrubs and whatever else. So if it's an electric fence with a certain height requirement and then, you know, keeping it
Away from the property line.
away from the property line so you don't have a cable vision guy coming and stumbling over it or
Yep.
whatever too, so.
Yeah, for a little kid,
Right.
just right off the sidewalk or something.
Mhm, yeah.
Ends up in it. So
Hey, Jimmy,
basic-
grab my hand.
Uh-huh. So basically, that goes back to
I think we just be silent.
fencing around gardening or other type of purpose, not.
We'll come up with something.
Yeah,
Mhm.
because I'm thinking this is more of a property line fencing.
Yeah.
Right. Mhm.
At which point being silent on it in other parts might be the most effective, unless we get
I mean, if they're
situation.
doing it at a small scale around a garden and it's a foot off the ground, no one's gonna know it's there, quite honestly. Versus specifically saying you can have an electric fence, I just see that being
Sure.
opening up
Mhm.
then you're asking me to say,
Yeah.
well, which electric fence is appropriate? 3-strand and it's 1500 volts? I don't see the point, it just seems like a little bit of a.
It wouldn't be bad, because I have neighbors' dogs that aren't on leashes, so maybe that would help.
You wanna buy them like an underground fence or a.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those-
What those are permitted specifically.
So, the conclusion is we're just gonna strike electric under
Or maybe we prohibit electric perimeter fences.
Well,
or-
I mean, there you get into the whole question about, well, how are they designed in all circumstances?
Yeah, I
mean,
think you leave the prohibition.
Yes.
And then if
As
someone happens to
drafted.
have around a garden and I can, in good conscience, consider it garden fencing, then so be it. No different than allowing chicken wire, that's not
I mean, it-
specifically prohibited.
Right, right. An electric could fit right in that same sentence with the chicken wire.
Yeah.
Chicken wire or electric, you know, electric, chicken wire or similar type fences except when used for gardening or gardening type purposes.
Oh, sure.
Does that
This is
work?
your earlier point.
Yep.
That would probably work.
So the question is, how much of a yard is actually a garden? Is it entire, you know?
It is.
4 acres?
Yeah, right.
We've had people argue that, yes.
Right.
But usually it's a tilled, developed area that is the actual garden.
The prairie isn't the garden.
Right.
Okay.
Just love to see the exceptions. There's always an exception. Oh, yeah.
Don't we have something in fencing right now in the existing code?
This is almost word for word what our current one is, because just prior to my arrival, so 6-7 years ago, the commission at that time spent months and months really trying to formulate this language, so it didn't make a lot of sense to throw that out the window.
Yeah.
And it seems to be working, at least I haven't had a lot of complaints with fences being not liking where they are, or the style or size or that kind of thing. So I think it is actually one of the few sections of the code that currently works. Okay.
Okay, that's
Okay.
all that we had. Just want to verify the next meeting date, third Monday, does that work?
Those calendars.
That would be the 18th. Yeah, it'd be September 18th. That would be the third Monday.
Alright. Let's get there. 18th of September. Any issues as with that date? Okay.
Okay,
We'll let that
What is
stand.
the date?
18th of September, third Monday. Third Monday.
Third Monday.
Okay, we'll, have that date stand as the next planning commission meeting on this topic anyway. Okay.
So all this that you brought today, we're not going to file this yet?
you can
Temporary?
temporary, you can put wellhead and, downtown in. And again, just put fencing in someplace. And as, what's that?
All the way to the back.
All the way in the back. And as it turns out, the table of contents is shifting around a little bit, but now we're at a point where it's set in concrete. So, we'll take care of that for you.
Sounds like a good plan.
Okay?
Do we have a scheduled meeting for the holiday next?
Oh, yeah.
At least I believe the mayor was looking at the 11th.
Yeah.
So we could just bump it back. We do have one site plan review, at least at this point, for the September meeting. So I would expect that we would.
Yeah, so we're shooting for the 11th yet. All right, with that, I entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move.
Motion by Fran, second by Lee. All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
And adjourned. Thank you all for being here and going through a very extensive discussion. Meeting.